I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for the law. Of course, this is nothing new. There is nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was practiced superbly by the early Christians who were willing to face hungry lions and the excruciating pains of the chopping block rather than to submit to certain unjust laws of the Roman Empire. In our own nation, the Boston Tea Party represented a massive act of civil disobedience. We should never forget that everything that Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal. And everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. It was illegal to aid and comfort Jews in Hitler's Germany. But if I were living in Germany at the time, I would have aided my Jewish brothers. Actually, we who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the creators of tension. We merely bring to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive. We bring it out in the open where it can be seen and dealt with, like a boil that can never be cured so long as it is covered up. The boil must be open with its ugliness exposed to the natural medicines of air and light. And justice must be exposed with all the tension its exposure creates in the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion so that it can be cured. In your statement, you assert that our actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because they precipitate violence. But is this a logical assertion? Isn't this like condemning a robbed man because his possession of money precipitated the evil act of robbery? Isn't this like condemning Jesus because his unique God consciousness and never ceasing devotion to God's will precipitated the evil act of crucifixion? We must come to see that, as the federal courts have affirmed consistently, it is wrong to urge an individual to cease his efforts to gain his basic constitutional rights because the quest may precipitate violence. Society must protect the robbed and punish the robber. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The yearning for freedom eventually manifests itself, and this is what has happened to the American Negro. So let him march. Let him make prayer pilgrimages to the city hall. Let him go on freedom rides and try to understand why he must do so. If his repressed emotions are not released in nonviolent ways, they will seek expression through violence. That is not a threat, rather a fact of history. So I have not said to my people, get rid of your discontent. Rather, I have tried to say that this normal and healthy discontent can be channeled into a creative outlet of nonviolent direct action. And now this term is being considered extremist. Though I was initially disappointed at being categorized as an extremist, as I continued to think about the matter, I gradually gained a measure of satisfaction from the label. Was not Jesus an extremist for love? Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you. Was not Amos an extremist for justice? Let justice roll down like waters of righteousness, like an ever-flowing stream. Was not Paul an extremist for the Christian gospel? I bear in the body the marks of the Lord Jesus. Was not Martin Luther an extremist? Here I stand. I cannot do otherwise. And John Bunyan, I will stay in jail till the end of my days before I make a butchery of my conscience. And Abraham Lincoln, this nation cannot survive half slave and half free. And Thomas Jefferson, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. So the question is not, rather, will we be extremists? But rather, what kind of extremists will we be? Will we be extremists for love or for hate? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of injustice? In that dramatic scene on Calvary's Hill, 3 men were crucified. We must not forget that all 3 men were crucified for the same crime, the crime of extremism. 2 were extremists for immorality and thus fell below their environment. The other, Jesus Christ, was an extremist for love, goodness, and truth. Perhaps the South, the nation, and the world is in dire need of extremists who are creative. I have heard numerous Southern religious leaders admonish their worshipers to comply with the desegregation decision because it is the law. But I have longed to hear white ministers declare, follow this decree because integration is morally right and because the Negro is your brother. In the midst of blatant injustices inflicted upon the Negro, I have watched white churchmen stand on the sideline and mouth pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious trivialities. In the midst of a mighty struggle to rid our nation of racial and economic injustice, I have heard many ministers say, those are social issues with which the gospel has no real concern. And I have watched many churches commit themselves to a completely otherworldly religion which makes a strange, unbiblical distinction between the body and the soul, between the sacred and the secular. Before closing, I feel impelled to mention one other point in your statement which has troubled me profoundly. You warmly commended the Birmingham police for keeping order and preventing violence. I doubt that you would have said that had you seen its dogs sinking their teeth into unarmed and nonviolent Negroes. I wish you had commended the Negro senators and demonstrators of Birmingham for their sublime courage and willingness to suffer, and their amazing discipline in the midst of great provocation. One day, the South will recognize its real heroes. One day, the South will know when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for what is best in the American dream and for the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage, thereby bringing our nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the Founding Fathers in their formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. I hope this letter finds you strong in the faith. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities. And in some, not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty. Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King Jr.